Diane Abbott.
Most members of this House will be aware that the welfare system can be a nightmare to navigate and does indeed need reform. But could we have less of this rhetoric about his £5 billion package of disability benefit, so-called reform, being moral? There is nothing moral about cutting benefits for what may be up to 1 million people. This is not about morality. This is about the Treasury's wish to balance the country's books on the back of the most vulnerable and poor people in this society.
Mr. Speaker, she's a passionate advocate and has been for a long time on this issue, and I pay tribute to that. But as she rightly acknowledges, the current system is broken. And this is where I disagree with her. I think 1 in 8 young people not in employment, training or education. That's 1 million young people. I think that's a moral issue, Mr. Speaker, because all the evidence suggests that someone in that situation at that stage of their life is going to find it incredibly difficult ever to get out of that level of dependency. That cuts across the opportunity and aspiration. It's the root of my values and Labour values about how we take working people forward. So I do see it as a moral issue. I'm not going to turn away from that. I am genuinely shocked that 1 million people, young people, are in that position, and I'm not prepared to shrug my shoulders and walk past it.
Veteran Labour MP Diane Abbott has publicly challenged her party leader, Keir Starmer, sharply criticising the Labour government's welfare cuts targeting disabled individuals. Abbott's intervention underscores a widening ideological rift within the Labour Party, bringing internal tensions into sharp relief. Abbott, known for her unwavering advocacy for marginalised groups, openly condemned the cuts, asserting, "This is not about morality. This is about the Treasury's wish to balance the country's books on the back of the most vulnerable and poor people in society." Her remarks follow the Labour leadership's controversial decision to implement stringent welfare policies ostensibly aimed at fiscal responsibility amid a challenging economic backdrop. Critics argue these measures disproportionately impact disabled and low-income communities, undermining Labour's historical commitment to social justice. Abbott's critique signals broader dissent brewing among Labour's progressive wing, frustrated by Starmer's increasingly centrist, economically conservative agenda. Since taking leadership, Starmer has consistently sought to distance Labour from the policies of his predecessor, Jeremy Corbyn, aiming instead to reposition Labour as fiscally prudent and electorally viable. However, Abbott's vocal challenge reflects unease that Labour's newfound fiscal conservatism might alienate its traditional voter base, particularly those dependent on state support. Political analysts view Abbott's statement as a significant indicator of internal struggle. One Westminster source noted, "Abbott is speaking for a substantial group within Labour, those worried about abandoning principles for electability." This tension isn't going away. The Labour Party now faces a delicate balancing act, reassuring economically cautious voters without eroding the trust of its core supporters, who view welfare as a fundamental commitment, not an expendable budget line.
Mr. Speaker, winter fuel payments have been snatched. The jobs tax is hammering everyone from business to charities. The Chancellor promised a once-in-a-Parliament budget that she would not come back for more. And in that budget, she said there will be no extension of the freeze in income tax thresholds. Ahead of the emergency budget, will he repeat? Mr. Speaker, ahead of the emergency budget, will he repeat the commitment that she made?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, she's got such prescriptive questions, she can't actually adapt them to the answers that I'm giving. I mean, Mr. Speaker, I think she now calls herself a Conservative realist. Well, I'm realistic about the Conservatives. The reality is they left open borders and she was the cheerleader. They crashed the economy, mortgages went through the roof, the NHS was left on its knees, and they hollowed out the armed forces. This government has already delivered 2 million extra NHS appointments, 750 breakfast clubs, record returns of people who shouldn't be here, and a fully funded increase in our defence spending. That is the difference that a Labour government makes.
In a House of Commons session marked by sharp exchanges and escalating tensions, Labour leaders Sir Keir Starmer and Conservative heavyweight Kemi Badenoch once again found themselves at the centre of an increasingly personal and policy-laden skirmish. The catalyst this time? The Chancellor's hastily assembled emergency budget, a fiscal intervention intended to steady the ship amid mounting economic turbulence, but one that has instead become a lightning rod for fierce partisan debate. The session began predictably enough, with Starmer stepping up to the dispatch box, his tone cool but firm. Armed with a battery of critiques, he wasted no time in zeroing in on what he described as the government's failure to anticipate the obvious and a budget that papers over the cracks without addressing the structural damage done over the past 14 years of Conservative mismanagement. But it was Badenoch's riposte that lit the touch paper, drawing audible gasps and murmurs from both benches. Dismissing Starmer's criticisms as tired lines rehearsed in the mirror, she snapped back, accusing the Labour leader of offering little substance beyond platitudes. "He's got such pre-scripted questions, he can't adapt them to the answers that I'm giving," Badenoch declared, a knowing smile flickering across her face as she glanced back at her colleagues. That single line became the defining quote of the encounter, a succinct jab, not only at Starmer's performance, but a broader accusation that Labour's approach lacks agility, weighed down by focus group, tested soundbites, and an over-reliance on predictable critiques. Yet behind the theatrics lies the serious matter of the emergency budget itself, a document born out of necessity after grim economic forecasts and rising public anxiety. The Chancellor's package includes sweeping tax cuts aimed at businesses, temporary freezes on energy levies, and a limited expansion of support for low-income households. Treasury insiders framed it as a targeted, pragmatic response to short-term pressures without committing the government to long-term fiscal liabilities. Labour, however, seized on what they view as glaring omissions. Starmer repeatedly pressed on the lack of additional funding for public services, pointing to overstretched liaison trusts and underfunded local councils as casualties of the government's priorities. His refrain, "Who's paying the price for this government's chaos? It's working families and the services they rely on," landed well within his own benches, but whether it cut through in the chamber at large remains debatable. Badenoch, stepping into the fray as one of the government's most prominent defenders, turned the attack back on Labour's spending ambitions. She questioned how Starmer's party would balance the books, accusing him of making blank check pledges without clarity on funding. Her argument, Labour's criticisms are hollow without concrete, costed alternatives, an accusation she underscored with repeated references to the economic black hole she claims lurks behind Labour policy. The exchanges revealed something more telling than just differing views on the budget. They underscored how both parties are positioning themselves as the country teeters towards the next general election. For Starmer, the challenge is to project competence, empathy, and a credible alternative without falling into the trap of overcoached predictability. For Badenoch, it's about harnessing her combative style to galvanize Conservative morale and frame Labour as out-of-touch technocrat. As one seasoned backbencher put it after the session, it's no longer just about the numbers. It's about who can sell a vision and who can think on their feet when the script falls apart.